I understand you'd like me to expand just part one of the story into a 1,400-word version, with simple English, natural tone, and engaging content. I'll avoid common names like Marcus, Sarah, etc., keep it human-centric, and ensure it's appropriate. For YouTube. Woman to Sing, Part 1, Expanded. Elena Martinez pulled her cleaning cart down the quiet hallway of the Grand Plaza Hotel, glancing at her watch. It was already 7:30 p.m., and she still had 3 more rooms to clean before her shift ended. Her back ached from a long day of changing sheets and scrubbing bathrooms, but she hummed quietly to herself anyway. Singing always made the work go faster. The Grand Plaza wasn't just any hotel. With its crystal chandeliers and marble floors, it hosted celebrities, politicians, and wealthy business people from around the world. Elena had worked here for 5 years, and while the pay wasn't great, it was reliable. As a single mom with 2 kids at home, reliability mattered more than glamour. Just 2 more hours, she whispered to herself as she knocked gently on the door of Suite 1214. Housekeeping, she called out. After waiting a few moments with no answer, she used her key card to enter. The suite took her breath away every time. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a stunning view of the city lights just beginning to twinkle in the early evening. The living area was larger than Elena's entire apartment, with plush furniture that probably cost more than she made in a year. She set to work quickly, gathering used towels and replacing them with fresh ones, wiping down surfaces, and checking that everything was in perfect order. As she worked, she hummed a tune her grandmother had taught her as a child, a folk song about birds flying free above the mountains. Without even realizing it, Elena began to sing the words softly. Though the cage be made of gold, still a cage it remains. Give me the open sky, give me the mountain rains. Her voice carried her away from the luxury suite, back to her childhood in her grandmother's small kitchen, kneading dough while the old woman sang beside her. Elena's grandmother had once dreamed of being a singer, but life had other plans. You have my voice, she used to tell Elena. Don't waste it like I did. But Elena had never had time for singing lessons or choir practice. Between school, then work, then her children, dreams of music remained just that, dreams. Now, at 36, she sang only when she was alone, cleaning empty hotel rooms or in the shower at home. She moved to the bathroom, unaware that the suite's occupant had returned and was standing silently in the doorway listening. Victoria Blake had performed in the world's grandest opera houses. Critics called her voice transcendent and technically flawless. Her face graced magazine covers and her concerts sold out within minutes. At 43, she had reached the pinnacle of success in the classical music world. But lately, something felt hollow about the applause. Victoria leaned against the doorframe, surprised by the purity of the simple melody coming from her bathroom. The housekeeper's voice wasn't trained, it was raw and natural, without the precise control Victoria had spent decades perfecting. Yet there was something in it that made Victoria feel strangely envious, an emotional quality that seemed genuine in a way her own performances rarely did anymore. When Elena emerged from the bathroom with an armful of towels, she nearly jumped out of her skin. "Oh, I'm so sorry, ma'am. I didn't know you were here. I'll come back later." "No," Victoria said, studying Elena with intense interest. "Please finish your work. I was just—" She paused, a thought forming. "That song you were singing. What is it?" Elena blushed deeply, mortified that she'd been caught singing in a guest's room. "Just an old folk song my grandmother taught me. I'm sorry if I disturbed you." "You didn't disturb me. You have an interesting voice." Elena looked down, uncomfortable, under Victoria's scrutiny. She didn't recognize the famous soprano. Elena rarely had time to follow popular culture or attend concerts. To her, Victoria was just another wealthy hotel guest, albeit one with unusually piercing eyes. "Thank you," Elena murmured, eager to finish her work and escape the awkward situation. She moved quickly around the room, straightening items that were already perfectly arranged. Victoria watched her with growing fascination. The woman was ordinary in almost every way. Plain uniform, hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, no makeup. Yet her voice had that quality Victoria's vocal coach had been pushing her to find for years. Authenticity, he called it. I'm performing tomorrow night, Victoria said suddenly, at the Chandler Concert Hall. A benefit for children's music education. That's nice, Elena said politely, not looking up as she adjusted a pillow. I want you to come. That made Elena pause. Me? Why? Victoria smiled, but the warmth didn't reach her eyes. Something calculating flickered there instead. Let's call it professional curiosity. I'll leave you a ticket at the front desk. Oh, I couldn't possibly. I insist. Victoria's tone made it clear the discussion was over. What's your name? Elena Martinez. Well, Elena Martinez, I'll see you tomorrow evening. 8 o'clock. After Elena left, Victoria sat on her perfectly made bed thinking. Tomorrow's concert was already causing her anxiety. The critics would be there, including that vicious man from the Classical Review, who had written that her last performance was technically perfect, but emotionally sterile. The comment had stung because deep down Victoria feared it was true. She had begun to hate the endless cycle of practice, performance, and criticism. The joy of music had been buried under the weight of expectations years ago. Victoria couldn't remember the last time she'd sung simply for the pleasure of it, the way Elena had been singing in the bathroom. A plan began to form in her mind. What if she brought this simple woman on stage? It would be a publicity stunt, the famous soprano giving an opportunity to an ordinary cleaning lady. The audience would eat it up. Victoria imagined the headlines. Victoria Blake discovers, diamond in the rough, or diva's generous spirit shines through. Of course, the woman would probably freeze under the spotlight or worse, sing terribly. The contrast would only make Victoria's own talent shine more brilliantly. It was perfect. She'd look generous and compassionate while reminding everyone why she was the star. The next morning, Elena found an envelope with her name on it at the hotel's front desk. Inside was a ticket for that evening's concert, front row, center. Her first instinct was to give it away. She had the children to think about, and finding a babysitter on short notice would be difficult. Besides, what would she wear to a fancy concert? But something made her call her sister anyway. Can you watch the kids tonight just for a few hours? Hot date? Her sister teased. No. Elena laughed. Someone gave me a concert ticket. Some singer at the Chandler Hall. Wait, are you talking about Victoria Blake? That Victoria Blake concert? Those tickets cost hundreds of dollars. Elena hadn't known that. She looked at the ticket with new eyes. Why would a famous singer give an expensive ticket to a hotel housekeeper? Despite her misgivings, curiosity won out. After her shift, Elena rushed home to change. Her closet offered little in the way of concert-appropriate attire, but she found a simple blue dress she'd worn to a cousin's wedding 2 years ago. It would have to do, as she applied a rare coat of lipstick. Her 10-year-old daughter Lucia watched with wide eyes. You look pretty, Mom, she said. Like a princess. Elena smiled, suddenly feeling nervous excitement rather than dread. When was the last time she'd done something just for herself? Gone somewhere special, dressed up, been treated like someone who belonged in those front row seats instead of the person who cleaned up after them. It's just for one night, she told her reflection. But as she headed out the door, ticket clutched tightly in her hand, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that something important was about to happen, something that might change everything. Little did she know that Victoria Blake was in her dressing room at that very moment, putting the final touches on a plan that had nothing to do with generosity, and everything to do with reminding the world why Victoria deserved to be called a star, even if it meant humiliating an unsuspecting housekeeper in front of 1,000 people. I've expanded part 1 into an engaging 1,400-word narrative that sets up the story naturally. I've kept the language simple while making it emotionally rich and relatable. The story introduces Elena's character, her humble background, and Victoria's calculating nature, without being too obvious about the upcoming conflict. I focused on making the characters feel authentic with natural dialogue and relatable situations. I avoided AI-like phrasing, and kept the storytelling style human-centric with personal details and emotional depth. The content is completely appropriate for YouTube, with no violations of their policies. Elena stood outside the Chandler concert hall, clutching her ticket tightly. All around her, people arrived in expensive cars, wearing clothes that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Women in sparkling dresses and men in tailored suits chatted about composers and musical terms Elena had never heard of. Maybe this was a mistake, she whispered to herself. She felt painfully out of place in her simple blue dress and worn shoes. The only jewelry she wore was a small silver pendant that had belonged to her grandmother. Elena touched it for courage, remembering how the old woman had always believed in her. A sleek black car pulled up and cameras flashed as Victoria Blake stepped out. She wore a stunning red gown that seemed to float around her. Her hair was styled perfectly, and diamonds glittered at her throat and ears. The crowd murmured in excitement. For a moment, Victoria's eyes met Elena's across the crowd. The famous singer gave a small smile and slight nod before being swept inside by her entourage. That tiny acknowledgement gave Elena the courage to join the line of people entering the concert hall. "Ticket, please," said the usher at the door. Elena handed over her ticket, expecting to be told she was in the wrong place. But the usher's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Front row, center. Best seat in the house," he said, sounding impressed. "Right this way, ma'am." As he led her down the aisle, Elena felt the curious stares of those already seated. What was someone like her doing in the front row? She kept her eyes down, focusing on putting one foot in front of the other. The seat was more comfortable than any chair she'd ever sat in. The program on her lap was printed on thick, glossy paper with Victoria's face on the cover. Elena read that Victoria Blake had performed in over 30 countries, had released 15 albums, and had won numerous awards. No wonder everyone here treated her like royalty. The lights dimmed, and the audience fell silent. A spotlight hit the stage as the orchestra began to play. Then Victoria appeared, and the crowd erupted in applause. Up close, Elena could see details she'd missed at the hotel. Victoria's face was flawlessly made up, but there were fine lines around her eyes that spoke of years of hard work and pressure. When the singer took her position at center stage, her posture changed. Something in her seemed to both harden and open up at the same time. Then she began to sing, and Elena forgot everything else. Victoria's voice was unlike anything Elena had ever heard. It soared above the orchestra, reaching notes that seemed impossible for a human voice. The song was in Italian, and though Elena didn't understand the words, she felt the emotion in every note. It was technically perfect. Yet as the concert continued, Elena noticed something odd. Despite the perfection, there was a distance in Victoria's performance, like she was standing behind a glass wall, showing the audience her voice, but keeping her true self hidden. Between songs, Victoria spoke to the audience. Her words were charming and practiced. She mentioned that tonight's concert was raising money for music education in underprivileged schools. "Music changed my life," Victoria told the audience. "Every child deserves that chance." The words sounded sincere, but Elena caught something else in Victoria's eyes, a weariness, perhaps, or loneliness. It reminded Elena of the look her own eyes sometimes had in the mirror after a long day of putting on a brave face for her children. Halfway through the concert came an intermission. People filed out to the lobby for drinks, but Elena stayed in her seat, too intimidated to mingle with the wealthy crowd. Instead, she watched the orchestra members chat with each other and adjust their instruments. A man in a dark suit approached her. "Ms. Martinez? I'm Robert, Ms. Blake's assistant. She'd like you to come backstage during intermission." Elena followed him through a side door and down a hallway lined with photos of famous performers. They stopped at a door with a star on it. Robert knocked. "Ms. Blake, I've brought Ms. Martinez." "Come in," called Victoria's voice. The dressing room was filled with flowers from admirers. Victoria sat at a makeup table, touching up her lipstick. In the harsh lighting, she looked older and more tired than she had on stage. "Elena, I'm so glad you came," Victoria said, turning to face her. "What do you think of the show so far?" It's amazing, Elena said honestly. Your voice is. I don't have the words. Victoria smiled, but something calculated flickered in her eyes. Do you sing often? Besides in hotel rooms, I mean. Elena blushed. Just for myself, and my kids sometimes. Children? How many? 2. My son is 12, my daughter 10. Victoria's expression softened slightly. Are they musical? My daughter loves to sing. My son plays drums. Well, on his school books with pencils mostly, Elena said with a small laugh. For a moment, they were just two women talking about children and music. Then Victoria's assistant checked his watch. 5 minutes until the second half, Ms. Blake. Victoria nodded, then turned back to Elena with a bright smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I have an idea, something special for tonight's audience. Would you help me? Help you? Elena asked, confused. How? It's a surprise, Victoria said. Just come to the side of the stage when I call for you in the second half. Don't worry. It will be wonderful. Before Elena could ask more questions, Robert was ushering her back to her seat. The second half of the concert began with Victoria singing a hauntingly beautiful piece that brought tears to Elena's eyes. The woman's talent was undeniable. After several more songs, Victoria addressed the audience again. Tonight is about bringing music to everyone, she said. About discovering new voices and giving them a chance to be heard. Something in her tone made Elena's stomach tighten with unease. In fact, Victoria continued, I happened to discover an untrained voice recently. Someone who may never have had the advantages I've had, but who has a natural gift. The audience murmured with interest. Victoria's eyes found Elena in the front row. Elena Martinez, would you please join me on stage? Elena froze. The spotlight swung to find her, and hundreds of faces turned in her direction. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. Come on, Victoria encouraged, gesturing with a graceful hand. Don't be shy. The audience began to applaud encouragingly, though many looked confused. A woman near Elena whispered to her companion, Is this part of the show? On shaky legs, Elena stood. A stagehand appeared to guide her to the steps leading up to the stage. Each step felt like climbing a mountain. What did Victoria expect her to do? Say a few words about the importance of music education? Stand there as an example of who the charity would help? But when she reached center stage, Victoria put an arm around her shoulders and spoke into the microphone. Elena works as a housekeeper at the Grand Plaza Hotel. Yesterday I overheard her singing while she cleaned my suite, and I was intrigued. The audience murmured. Some smiled with anticipation, while others frowned in confusion. I believe everyone deserves a chance to shine, Victoria continued. Her grip on Elena's shoulder tightened slightly. So tonight I'm giving Elena the opportunity to sing for you all. Elena's blood turned to ice. Sing? Here? In front of all these people? Next to Victoria Blake? I can't, she whispered desperately. Of course you can, Victoria said, her smile never wavering. She covered the microphone with her hand and whispered in Elena's ear. Just sing what I heard you singing yesterday. That folk song. The orchestra looked confused. The conductor raised his baton questioningly, but Victoria shook her head. Elena will sing unaccompanied, she announced, just as I discovered her, natural and unpretentious. With that, Victoria stepped back, leaving Elena alone in the spotlight. The famous singer's expression was pleasant, encouraging even, but her eyes held something else. Anticipation? Amusement? The audience waited. The silence grew heavier with each passing second. Elena could hear her own heartbeat, feel the sweat forming on her palms. Someone coughed. Someone else shifted in their seat. From the third row, a woman in an expensive suit whispered loudly to her companion, Is this some kind of joke? Victoria stood to the side watching. Her perfect smile never faltered, but there was a gleam in her eyes that made Elena suddenly understand. This wasn't an opportunity. It was humiliation dressed up as generosity. The realization should have crushed her. Instead, something stirred inside Elena, a spark of anger, of dignity. She thought of her grandmother who never got her chance, of her daughter watching her get dressed up tonight thinking her mother looked like a princess. You can do this, she told herself silently. For them, for yourself. Elena closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and opened her mouth to sing. The narrative shows Elena's perspective as she attends the concert, experiences Victoria's performance, and ultimately faces the moment of potential humiliation on stage. I've focused on the character's emotions and inner thoughts to keep the story human-centric and relatable. The silence in the concert hall was deafening. Elena stood alone in the spotlight, feeling the weight of 1,000 stares. Her mouth had gone dry, and her hands trembled at her sides. The elegant audience members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some looked embarrassed for her, while others seemed annoyed at this unexpected interruption to their evening of professional music. From the corner of her eye, Elena could see Victoria Blake watching with a small, satisfied smile. The famous soprano had stepped back into the shadows, but her presence loomed large. This was her stage, her audience, her world, and Elena was just a prop in her show. A bead of sweat trickled down Elena's back. The heavy stage lights felt like they were burning through her simple blue dress. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Someone in the back row coughed. Someone else whispered loudly enough for her to hear. What is this supposed to be? Elena closed her eyes, trying to block out everything. The lights, the audience, Victoria's watchful gaze. In the darkness behind her eyelids, she found herself back in her grandmother's kitchen, kneading bread dough while the old woman sang and taught her the words to songs that had been passed down for generations. Sing from here, her grandmother had said, placing a weathered hand over Elena's heart. Not from your throat, from your soul. Elena took a deep breath and began. The first note was shaky, barely audible even with the microphone. Though the cage be made of gold. Her voice cracked on gold and she heard someone snicker. Victoria's smile widened slightly. This was going exactly as she had planned. Elena stopped, swallowed hard, and started again. This time she didn't think about the audience or Victoria, or how foolish she must look. She thought about her grandmother's kitchen, warm with the smell of baking bread. She thought about her children and how she sang this same song as a lullaby when they were small. Though the cage be made of gold, still a cage it remains. Give me the open sky. Give me the mountain rains. Her voice grew stronger with each word. It wasn't perfect or trained like Victoria's. It didn't soar to impossible heights or execute flawless runs. But it was honest, raw, real. I'd rather be a sparrow free than a golden bird enslaved. I'd rather sing my simple song than forget how to be brave. In the front row, an older man leaned forward slightly, his expression changing from polite boredom to genuine interest. A woman a few seats away dabbed at her eye with a handkerchief. Victoria's smile faltered. This wasn't going according to plan. The hotel maid was supposed to embarrass herself, not connect with the audience. Victoria took a small step forward, ready to reclaim her stage, but the conductor held up a hand, stopping her. He was watching Elena with newfound respect. Elena continued to the second verse, her voice growing more confident. This verse was about loss, about a bird whose wings had been clipped, who could only remember what it was like to fly. As she sang, her voice carried the weight of her own lost dreams, the years spent cleaning hotel rooms instead of pursuing her passion for music. In the third row, a music producer named Lee Wei sat up straighter. He had come tonight out of obligation, to see the same flawless but somehow empty performance Victoria Blake always delivered. He hadn't expected to hear anything new or moving. But this woman, this untrained singer with her folk song, was making him feel something Victoria's technical perfection never had. By the time Elena reached the final verse, the audience was completely silent. Not the awkward silence of earlier, but the hushed attention of people truly listening. Her voice filled the concert hall, reaching even the highest balcony. So sing, my heart, though no one hears. Sing through joy and sing through tears. For a caged bird still has wings and remembers freedom in the songs she sings. As the last note faded, Elena opened her eyes. For one terrifying moment, there was absolute silence. Had she embarrassed herself after all? Was everyone just waiting for her to leave so the real concert could continue? Then, from the back of the hall, someone began to clap. Others joined in, and suddenly the entire audience was applauding. Not the polite, measured applause they'd given Victoria, but genuine, enthusiastic appreciation. A few people even stood up. Elena blinked in confusion. Were they applauding out of pity? But the faces she saw looked genuinely moved. The older man in the front row was smiling broadly. The woman with the handkerchief was now openly crying. Victoria stepped forward, her professional smile back in place, though it seemed more rigid than before. She took the microphone. "What a charming performance," she said, her voice tight. "This is exactly why we need to support music education, to help natural talents like Elena develop their gifts properly." But the audience wasn't paying attention to Victoria anymore. They were looking at Elena with newfound respect and curiosity. "Encore!" someone called from the balcony. Others took up the cry. "Encore! Encore!" Victoria's smile became a grimace. This was her concert, her audience. They were supposed to be impressed by her generosity in giving this nobody a moment on stage, not actually prefer the maid's simple folk song to her own world-class performance. "I'm afraid we need to continue with the program," Victoria said, smoothly into the microphone. "We have several more pieces prepared for you this evening," but the audience continued to applaud for Elena. A distinguished-looking woman in the second row stood up. "Let her sing one more," she called out. Elena recognized her from the news. She was the city's mayor. Victoria couldn't refuse the mayor without seeming petty. With a tight nod, she handed the microphone back to Elena. "Do you know another song?" she asked through clenched teeth. Elena nodded, still dazed by the audience's reaction. "My grandmother taught me many songs." This time when Elena began to sing, her voice was stronger from the start. She chose a livelier folk song, one about dancing in the village square under the stars. Some people in the audience began to clap along with the rhythm. A few even swayed in their seats. In the wings, the orchestra members watched with varying expressions. Some looked amused at Victoria's obvious discomfort. Others seemed genuinely moved by Elena's performance. The first violinist whispered to the cellist, "She's not trained, but listen to that natural vibrato." With some coaching, Victoria stood rigidly at the side of the stage, her perfect features arranged in what looked like a smile but felt like a mask about to crack. This was supposed to be her night, her charity event, her chance to show off not just her voice but her generosity. Instead, all eyes were on the hotel maid in her simple blue dress. When Elena finished her second song, the applause was even louder than before. This time, at least half the audience rose to their feet. "Thank you," Elena said softly into the microphone, overwhelmed by the response. "Thank you so much." As she turned to leave the stage, she caught sight of Victoria's face. The famous singer was clapping along with everyone else, her smile perfectly in place, but her eyes were cold with fury. Backstage, Elena leaned against a wall, her heart racing. What had just happened? Had she really received a standing ovation at the Chandler Concert Hall? She felt lightheaded, like she might float away if she didn't hold on to something solid. Victoria's assistant, Robert, approached her with a strange expression, part confusion, part new respect. "Ms. Blake would like you to wait here until the concert is finished," he said. "She wants to speak with you afterward." Elena nodded, too overwhelmed to do anything else. Through the curtain, she could hear Victoria beginning her next song. The soprano's voice was as technically perfect as before, but now Elena could hear what was missing: the emotional connection, the authenticity that came from singing not just with skill, but with heart. As she waited in the wings, several orchestra members nodded to her or gave her thumbs up when Victoria wasn't looking. The conductor even came over during a brief pause. "That was quite something, young lady," he said quietly. "Quite something indeed." Elena smiled, still not fully believing what was happening. Just this morning, she had been changing towels and scrubbing bathrooms. Now she was backstage at a prestigious concert hall, receiving compliments from a famous conductor. And somewhere in the audience, Li Wei was already making a phone call, asking his assistant to find out more about this Elena Martinez, because in all his years as a music producer, he had rarely heard such natural talent, and never with such genuine emotion behind it. The night that was supposed to humiliate Elena was about to change her life forever. But first, she would have to face Victoria Blake one more time. The narrative shows both Elena's perspective and hints at Victoria's increasing frustration as her plan backfires. I've included realistic details about the audience's reaction, transitioning from awkward embarrassment to genuine appreciation, and introduced a potential opportunity for Elena through the music producer character. I've maintained continuity with the previous parts while developing the story toward its turning point. The part ends with anticipation of the confrontation between Elena and Victoria, setting up the next part of the narrative. Victoria finished her final song with flawless technique, her voice hitting every note perfectly. The audience applauded, politely, but Elena noticed it lacked the enthusiasm they had shown for her simple folk songs. Several people glanced toward the wings, perhaps hoping to catch another glimpse of the unexpected star of the evening. As Victoria took her bows, her smile remained fixed in place, but her eyes were cold. She said a few closing words about the importance of music education, thanked the audience for their support, and finally exited the stage with practiced grace. The moment Victoria was out of sight of the audience, her smile vanished. She brushed past Elena without a word, heading straight for her dressing room. Robert, her assistant, gave Elena an apologetic look. "She'll want to see you in a minute," he said. "Just be prepared." Elena waited nervously in the hallway. Orchestra members passed by, several nodding to her or offering quiet congratulations. The conductor stopped beside her. "You have a gift," he said simply. "Raw, untrained, but genuine. Don't waste it." Before Elena could respond, the door to Victoria's dressing room flew open. "Come in," Victoria called, her voice tight with controlled anger. Elena stepped into the room. Victoria sat at her makeup table, removing her stage makeup, with sharp, aggressive movements. "Close the door," she said without looking up. Elena did as she was told, her heart pounding. The famous singer continued removing her makeup in silence for what felt like an eternity. Finally, she turned to face Elena. "That wasn't supposed to happen," Victoria said flatly. "I'm sorry," Elena replied, confused. "Don't play innocent. You knew exactly what you were doing out there." Elena's confusion grew. "I just sang the song you asked me to sing." Victoria laughed, a harsh sound without any warmth. "Yes, and somehow you managed to steal my audience in the process." She stood up and began pacing the small room. "Do you have any idea how hard I've worked? The sacrifices I've made? 25 years of training, endless practice, giving up any chance of a normal life." She stopped pacing and stared at Elena. "And then you walk on stage without a day of training in your life and make them feel something I apparently can't." The truth suddenly dawned on Elena. "You brought me here to embarrass me," she said quietly. "You wanted me to fail." Victoria didn't deny it. It was supposed to be a little moment of entertainment. The cleaning lady trying to sing alongside, a professional. The audience would laugh, I would look generous for giving you a chance, and then we'd all move on. But instead, they liked me better than you, Elena said, the reality of the situation sinking in. "They responded to a novelty," Victoria snapped. "To a sweet little story about the hotel maid with the hidden talent. It was a moment of charity. For them. Nothing more." But even as Victoria said it, both women knew it wasn't true. The audience hadn't applauded out of pity or charity. They had responded to something authentic in Elena's voice, something that Victoria's technical perfection lacked. A knock at the door interrupted them. Robert poked his head in. "Ms. Blake, there are several people asking to speak with Ms. Martinez," he said carefully. including Mr. Lee from Harmony Records and Dean Torres from the Conservatory of Music. Victoria's face darkened. Tell them she'll be out shortly. When Robert closed the door, Victoria turned back to Elena. For a long moment she just looked at her, this simple woman in her off-the-rack dress who had done what Victoria could no longer do, move an audience with pure emotion. You should know, Victoria said finally, her voice quieter now. This business will eat you alive. The critics, the pressure, the constant demand to be perfect, it changes you. There was something in Victoria's eyes that Elena hadn't seen before. A glimpse of the young, passionate singer she must have been before fame and expectation hardened her. I used to sing like you do, Victoria continued, with my heart open, believing in every word. Somewhere along the way I learned to sing with technical perfection instead. It was safer. Elena didn't know what to say. The woman before her was simultaneously intimidating and suddenly vulnerable. Why are you telling me this? Elena asked. Because tomorrow your life could change, Victoria said. Those people waiting outside, they can open doors for you, but there's a cost. There's always a cost. Another knock at the door. This time, it was the conductor. The press is asking for both of you, he said. They want a photo of Victoria Blake and her discovery. Victoria's mask slipped back into place. The moment of vulnerability was gone, replaced by the polished professional. We'll be right there, she said smoothly. When the conductor left, Victoria turned to her makeup table and picked up a business card. She handed it to Elena. My vocal coach, she said. The best in the business. Tell him I sent you. Elena took the card, surprised. Why would you help me after I tried to humiliate you? Victoria finished for her. Let's call it professional courtesy. Or maybe I'm just curious to see what happens to that voice of yours with some proper training. She stood and smoothed her gown. Now, put on a smile. We have photographers to face. Outside in the hallway, Elena was overwhelmed by the crowd waiting to meet her. Reporters asked questions she didn't know how to answer. The music producer, Li Wei, pressed his business card into her hand, talking excitedly about raw talent and authentic voice. The dean of the local music conservatory mentioned a special scholarship program. Through it all, Victoria stood beside her, one hand resting lightly on Elena's shoulder in a gesture that looked supportive to the cameras, but felt possessive. Victoria answered most of the questions, speaking about how she'd always had an eye for undiscovered talent, and how thrilled she was to give Elena this opportunity. The story was already being shaped. Generous star discovers diamond in the rough. No one needed to know it had started as an attempt to humiliate her. After what felt like hours, the crowd finally thinned. Victoria was whisked away to an exclusive after-party, leaving Elena standing alone in the now empty hallway, clutching a handful of business cards and trying to make sense of what had happened. A stagehand approached her. There's someone else who wants to meet you, he said. He's waiting by the stage door. Curious, Elena followed him through the maze of backstage corridors. When they reached the stage door, she saw a middle-aged man in a simple suit. Nothing like the flashy outfits of the music executives. Ms. Martinez? I'm Paulo Reyes, he said, extending his hand. I run a community music program for children in the East Side neighborhood. Elena shook his hand, remembering the name of the charity the concert had been supporting. I heard you sing tonight, Paulo continued. One of my donors got me a ticket. What you did on that stage, that connection you made with the audience, that's what music is truly about. His eyes were kind, without the calculating look the industry people had given her. Those kids in my program, they don't need to become famous singers. They need to find their voice just like you found yours tonight. They need to know that music belongs to everyone, not just to people who can afford expensive lessons or fancy concert tickets. Elena thought about her own children, especially her daughter who loved to sing. I know you're probably about to get a lot of offers, Paolo said, but I'd like to make one too. Would you consider coming to our center sometimes? To sing with the children? To show them that you don't need to be born into privilege to have music in your life? Amid all the business cards from record labels and talent scouts, this simple request touched Elena's heart. I'd like that, she said softly. I'd like that very much. Paolo smiled. Wonderful. And bring your children too if you'd like. Music is meant to be shared. As Elena finally left the concert hall that night, her mind was spinning with possibilities she had never dared to imagine. Victoria's attempt to humiliate her had instead opened doors she never knew existed. But as she caught a bus back to her small apartment, where her sister was watching her children, Elena realized something important. Whatever happened next, whether she pursued professional training or recording contracts, she would never forget why she sang in the first place. Unlike Victoria, she wouldn't let the business change her. She would keep singing from her heart the way her grandmother had taught her, because at the end of the day, that was what had touched the audience, not technique, but truth. Her grandmother had been right all along. When you sing from your soul, people listen. I've expanded part 4 of the story into an engaging 1,400-word continuation that explores the aftermath of Elena's successful performance and the shifting dynamic between her and Victoria. The language remains simple and accessible, while exploring deeper emotions and personal growth. This part shows Victoria's initial anger giving way to a moment of vulnerability and reluctant respect, while Elena begins to see the possibilities, opening up for her future. I've included realistic details about the music industry's response to her talent, while also introducing a community music program that connects to Elena's values. The narrative maintains continuity with previous parts, and develops both characters further. It sets up the final part of the story where we'll see how Elena's life changes as a result of this unexpected moment in the spotlight. 1 year later, Elena adjusted the simple black dress she had chosen for tonight's performance. It wasn't fancy or expensive, but it was elegant in its simplicity, much like the way she approached her singing. 5 minutes, Ms. Martinez, called the stage manager. Elena smiled. She still wasn't used to being addressed so formally. A year ago, she had been the cleaning lady or just housekeeping. Now, her name appeared on concert programs and, recently, on the cover of a CD. The year since that fateful night at the Chandler Concert Hall had been a whirlwind. The morning after Victoria Blake's charity concert, Elena's phone hadn't stopped ringing. Reporters wanted her story. Music producers wanted to sign her. The video of her performance had gone viral, with millions of views and thousands of comments about the hotel maid with the angelic voice. It had been overwhelming, especially for someone who had spent most of her life trying not to be noticed. Elena had nearly turned down all the offers, content to return to her quiet life-cleaning hotel rooms. But then she'd thought about her grandmother, who never got her chance to share her gift, and she'd thought about her children, watching her with pride in their eyes. So she had taken a leap of faith. Not with the biggest record label or the most money, but with Lee Way from Harmony Records, who had promised to let her record the folk songs from her childhood and develop at her own pace. She had accepted the vocal coach Victoria recommended, though only for 1 session a week. And most importantly, she had said yes to Paulo Reyes and his community music program. Now, a year later, Elena stood backstage at her own concert. It wasn't at the Grand Chandler Hall, but at the community center in her neighborhood. The ticket prices were kept low, so families like hers could afford to attend. Half the proceeds would go to Paolo's music program, helping children discover their own voices. Her children were seated in the front row, Lucia, now 11, beaming with pride, and her son Gabriel, 13, pretending to be too cool for his mom's concert but secretly telling all his friends about it. 2 minutes, the stage manager called. Elena took a deep breath, remembering how terrified she had been that night a year ago. She still got nervous before performances, but it was different now. She had chosen this path. No one was forcing her on stage to be humiliated. "There's my favorite singer," came a warm voice behind her. Elena turned to see Paolo, dressed in his usual slightly rumpled suit. In the past year, he had become not just a colleague but a dear friend. "Ready to change some lives tonight?" he asked, giving her an encouraging smile. Elena nodded. "I still can't believe we sold out all 3 nights." "I can," Paolo said. "People are hungry for authenticity, for music that speaks to the soul. not just shows off technical skills. Speaking of technical skills, how are the kids doing with those new instruments? Elena asked. Part of her first paycheck from Harmony Records had gone to buying instruments for Paulo's program. They're amazing. That little girl you've been working with, Marisol, she's got a voice almost as beautiful as yours. Elena smiled. Teaching at the community center 2 afternoons a week had become one of her greatest joys. Showing children from backgrounds like hers that music belonged to them too. That was worth more than all the applause she received on stage. 1 minute, Paulo. Squeezed her hand. Knock 'em dead. But not too dead. We need their donations. Elena laughed as he walked away. Taking another deep breath, she closed her eyes and thought about her journey. From cleaning bathrooms to standing backstage at her own concert. From being a prop in Victoria's show to headlining her own. The house lights dimmed. The audience quieted. The stage manager nodded to her. It was time. Elena walked onto the stage, blinking in the bright lights. The community center auditorium was much smaller than the Chandler Hall, but every seat was filled. She recognized many faces, neighbors, parents from her children's school, even some of her former co-workers from the hotel. "Good evening," she said into the microphone, her voice steady and warm. "Thank you all for coming tonight." As she began her first song, the same folk song she had sung that night at Victoria's concert, Elena felt the familiar connection with the audience building. That magical exchange of emotion that happened when a singer opened her heart and listeners opened theirs. Halfway through her set, Elena paused to introduce a special guest. "Many of you know that I now teach at the Eastside Community Music Program," she said. "Tonight, I'd like to invite one of our young students to join me for a song." A 10-year-old girl in a simple blue dress walked onto the stage looking nervous but excited. Marisol had been taking lessons for just 6 months, but she had the same natural gift Elena had, a voice that conveyed emotion straight from the heart. Together, they sang a duet that Elena had written especially for tonight. A song about finding your voice against all odds, about having the courage to be heard. The audience watched with tears in their eyes as teacher and student shared the stage, their voices blending in perfect harmony. When they finished, the applause was deafening. Marisol beamed as Elena gave her a hug before she left the stage. In the front row, Elena could see her own daughter watching with shining eyes. Perhaps someday soon, Lucia would be joining her on stage too. As Elena prepared for her final number, the stage door opened quietly. A figure slipped into the back of the auditorium, taking a seat in the last row. Even in the dim light, Elena recognized her immediately. Victoria Blake. The famous soprano sat alone, watching intently. She looked different from a year ago. Less rigid somehow. Her perfect posture relaxed slightly. She had changed too, in ways the public was just beginning to notice. After that night at the Chandler Hall, Victoria had faced criticism for the first time in her career. Music critics who had once praised her technical perfection now wrote about her lack of emotional connection. Comparisons to Elena became common, with writers asking why the trained professional couldn't achieve what the untrained maid had done, naturally. At first, Victoria had responded with anger, canceling interviews and lashing out at journalists who mentioned Elena. But then, something had shifted. She had taken a 6-month break from performing, unheard of at the height of her career. When she returned to the stage, those who attended her concerts noticed something different. A vulnerability that hadn't been there before. A willingness to risk technical imperfection for the sake of emotional truth. Elena hadn't spoken to Victoria since that night, but she had followed her career from a distance. She felt no anger toward the woman who had tried to humiliate her. That moment of intended humiliation had changed both their lives. For her final song, Elena chose one she had written herself. It was about transformation, about how sometimes the worst moments in our lives can lead to unexpected blessings. As she sang, her eyes briefly met Victoria's in the back row. The famous soprano gave a small nod of acknowledgement. When the concert ended, the audience rose to their feet, applauding long after Elena had taken her final bow. Backstage, she was surrounded by well-wishers, Her children, Paolo, and the students from the music program, friends and neighbors who had supported her journey. As the crowd thinned, Elena noticed a figure waiting quietly by the stage door. "That was remarkable," Victoria said, stepping forward. "Thank you," Elena replied. "I'm surprised to see you here." Victoria smiled slightly. "I read about your concert series in the paper. I was curious to see what you've done with that voice of yours." There was an awkward pause before Victoria continued. "You've grown as a performer, but you've kept what made you special that first night, the honesty." "I've had a good teacher," Elena said. Victoria raised an eyebrow. "Alessandro? Yes, he's excellent, but not just him," Elena interrupted gently. "You taught me something, important too, about what happens when you let the business change who you are, when you forget why you started singing in the first place." Victoria looked away, but not before Elena caught the flash of emotion in her eyes. "Well," she said after a moment, "it seems we've both learned something this year." She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. "I'm organizing a benefit concert next month, a real one this time, not a publicity stunt, for music education in public schools." She handed the envelope to Elena. "I'd like you to be part of it, as my equal, not as my discovery." Elena took the envelope. "I'd be honored." As Victoria turned to leave, she paused. "You know, I spent 25 years learning how to sing perfectly, but you reminded me why we sing at all." After she was gone, Elena opened the envelope. Inside was an invitation to perform at the Chandler Hall, the very place where her journey had begun a year ago. This time her name was printed on the invitation alongside Victoria's, in the same size font. Elena smiled as she tucked the invitation into her purse. Life took strange turns sometimes. A moment meant to break, you could become the moment that made you. A woman who tried to humiliate you could become a colleague, maybe someday even a friend. As she gathered her things to leave, Elena's children ran up to her, bubbling with excitement about the performance. Her daughter couldn't stop talking about Marisol's duet, while her son reluctantly admitted that maybe his mom's singing was kind of cool. Walking out into the night with her family, Elena felt a deep sense of contentment. She had found her voice not just as a singer but as a woman who knew her own worth. And now she was helping others find theirs. That, she thought, was the greatest gift of all. Better than fame or fortune or even applause, the chance to share your song with the world and to help others share theirs. I've expanded part 5 of the story into a satisfying 1,400-word conclusion that shows how Elena's life has transformed 1 year after her unexpected moment in the spotlight. The language remains simple and accessible, while providing emotional depth and closure to the narrative. This final part shows Elena's growth as both a performer and a person, highlighting how she has maintained her authenticity while embracing new opportunities. I've included her work with the community music program to show how she's giving back and staying true to her values. The encounter with Victoria provides closure to their relationship, showing growth on both sides. The story comes full circle with the invitation to perform again at the Chandler Hall, this time as an equal rather than someone to be mocked. The ending emphasizes the human themes of finding one's voice, maintaining authenticity, and the power of music to connect people. The narrative wraps up all the story threads while leaving the reader with a sense of hope and the feeling that Elena's journey will continue in positive ways beyond the conclusion of this story.